Jirga is an Australian film, and no, fear not, this channel has not lost its focus, which is foreign language TV shows and movies, that is foreign to English, so non-English language TV shows and movies. Jirga is entirely shot and set in Afghanistan, so it is about 50% in Pashto, 50% in English, but there's actually very little dialogue anyway, and I'll get back to that and the impact it has on the film. This film tells the story of an Australian ex-soldier who is trying to find his way back to a village in Afghanistan where he accidentally shot and killed a civilian man while he was part of a raid there. And the opening scene shows this in a way, but in my opinion they could have either done without that, so could have gotten rid of it entirely and just let the film play out as you're watching it. That is, you discover that this is what's happened with a little tiny bit more dialogue, or they needed to show it a little bit more properly. I get what they're going for with a sort of implication that that's what's happened, but for me it kind of jars with the rest of the film because it's really the only footage we see that looks like this. It's all on that kind of night vision green looking stuff, and it just doesn't really work for me. So it's only maybe a minute long, but I think that scene could have either been done without, and we could have for once gone with the non-rule or broken the rule of show don't tell. We could have gone for the rule of tell don't show, or we needed to be shown that properly. So talking about this film's budget, it was very low, and that wasn't the only constraint they had. They were actually supposed to be cleared to film in a certain region of Pakistan, or it may have been Afghanistan, I'm not really sure, and that's what's meant to become the first act of the film. But in the end they couldn't get clearance to film there, and they had to film the entire first act in Kabul, basically on the lowdown. And if you're not familiar with any kind of filmmaking or even video making, you won't realize how big of an ask it is to film anything on the lowdown. Like even just for this video here, there's stuff happening that you can't see. Like basically everything that's not in shot here is something to do with making the shot better. So there's lights there, they're extremely bright. There's a microphone here. Just filming, and especially once you start making that, trying to make it cinema quality film, that's just insane. And doing that on the lowdown outside in a busy city in basically the desert, I'm guessing Kabul is, it's just a huge ask. And unfortunately, it does show. I mean, they did pretty well given the circumstances, but there's a lot of editing that's quite awkward in this opening act where they're filming in Kabul, and there's a lot of post dubbing because they just wouldn't have been able to get the sound, because traditionally to get the sound you use a boom mic, so someone actually holds this huge mic just out of shot, and they wouldn't have been able to do that. So they've done dubbing, and it does show. A lot of the dialogue is quite clunky, and when I say a lot of the dialogue, there isn't actually a lot of dialogue, but there's just these sort of conversations with people who speak broken English, but even that doesn't seem realistic. Like the way that they speak broken English isn't really right. Now, this isn't a huge deal. I remember watching this film in the cinema for the first time 2 years ago and thinking, this is kind of weird, it doesn't really work for a cinematic kind of film, but well, it does work actually. You stay engaged, and there's some good moments, there's some nice moments, there's some tense moments, but it's clearly not the first act that they would have hoped to have made, so it's a bit of a shame. Jirga is quite short, and I'm guessing that the first act probably would have been a little bit longer if they'd been able to film it the way they'd wanted to, which would have been nice, but it does move very quickly into the second act, which is where they move out of Kabul and go basically into the desert to try and find this village, and those bits are stunning, it has to be said. These parts of the film are easily my favourites. It's fairly clear to me that the makers of this film also appreciate this part, at least visually, the best, because this is the poster of the film. The way they show the Afghani desert is really quite something. They don't just set the camera down and say, look, desert, which as a photographer, I get that it's tempting to do when you have this amazing landscape. You feel like you can just shoot anywhere and get a good shot, but they don't fall into that trap. They work hard to make these really interesting and beautiful shots. Then there is the driver who takes our ex-soldier Sam out into the desert. This guy is the only real other main-ish character of the film. There really is only one main character, but if there's a second character, it's this driver who doesn't speak a word of English. He only speaks what I assume is Pashto. And this guy is the best. He's so good. He is not subtitled, so you don't understand a word he's saying, obviously, unless you speak Pashto. But the scenes between him and Sam are fascinating and charming, and just somehow more enjoyable than they should be. I've read some reviews of Jirga by people who seem to think that this film is somehow about Sam discovering the true beauty of the Afghani people or something. It sounds lame, because it is, and happily, in my opinion at least, that's not what's happening. To me, these scenes are just showing a part of his journey that is in a beautiful place with an interesting man who doesn't want to take Sam where he wants to go. That's a really interesting element of this plot, is that the guy who is helping him out with this journey, if we take this story as a man goes on a journey, which it is, the guy taking him on the journey, the donkey as such, doesn't want to go. Now would be a good time to tell you that the composer for this film, the musical score composer, and I actually know each other personally. We went to uni together, we studied music together, and we were huge film music fans, and especially of Danny Elfman and Ennio Morricone. And if you know that about the composer, that is that he is a huge fan of Ennio Morricone, then you can actually hear that in the score. You can hear kind of shades of the Dollars trilogy, so that's like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly for a few dollars more, A Fistful of Dollars. You can hear shades of that, even though this film really isn't like those films, and I love that. Obviously, knowing him personally, I love that I could hear that. I remember seeing it the first time, and when I watched it again just recently, it's just, I get all nerded out by it. I love it, but also you should be able to hear that now that you've heard me mention it. And if you don't know what those films are, that is the Clint Eastwood, A Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, I am not sure what you're doing watching videos like mine on YouTube when you haven't watched those videos. They're on YouTube Play or whatever it's called, the one where you have to pay, and you need to see them. That is all. Also, if you like the music from those films, which you should, or you're wrong, I'm going to put a link in the description for the Danish National Orchestra, I think they're called, playing those scores and a few others. This cannot be described, okay? Link is in the description. Anyway, now that I've talked about westerns and Ennio Morricone for way too long, back to this score. There is a fair bit of synth in it as well. Me personally, I'm not as big a fan of the synth parts as I am of the guitar parts, but like I mentioned, I'm sort of biased towards the guitar parts because of what they remind me of. But all in all, considering how much music has to be in this score, because like I said, there's almost no dialogue in this movie, so a lot of it is score, and that this is AJ True's first score, basically. This is his first, the first time he's written a score. It's his first score, I just said that. Okay, given all those things, this is a pretty freaking good score, and I say that removing myself from the fact that I know him. Like, I don't think it blows me away or anything, but it's so much more competent than so many other film scores out there to like big budget Hollywood movies and people who should know better. So to talk about the third act, in my opinion, it kind of starts too early, and yes, you could argue that it's really a continuation of the second act, and the third act doesn't start until much, much later than I'm implying. But there's a very distinct shift in feel once the driver has gone, and then it gets a little bit vague for me. We start seeing things from a perspective that isn't Sam's, and we can tell this because we see subtitles in a language that Sam doesn't speak, and we see some scenes that he is not present for. So this almost feels like a different film. And apart from length, I don't really get why these scenes are here. I feel like the writer Ben Gilmour thought that this was necessary not just for length, but for story as well. And it's true that if he didn't have it, or if it only went for half as long as, in my opinion, it should, this film would be like 50 minutes rather than 75, and that's a very awkward length because it's not a short film and it's not a feature. But in my opinion, these scenes with the rebels, presumably the Taliban, are the least necessary and, as some others have pointed out, also the least realistic. I wonder if it wouldn't have been worthwhile writing and filming another 2 or 3 scenes in Kabul, or even just somewhere that looks like Kabul, at least from the inside of a building, and then another 5 minutes with the driver maybe, and then you'd have a 70-minute film without this strange kind of 2.5 act-ish bit. Like I said, there were massive filming constraints, so I get that, but these scenes towards the sort of 3/4 mark, they really feel unnecessary and, like I said, unrealistic, and those kinds of scenes are just not good for anyone. So when we come to what this film has all been about, which I won't talk about too much because it is a bit spoilerish, does the film succeed in making you feel how you're meant to? In my opinion, yes. I think this is a profoundly sad story, and I don't think it's about Western military forces in Afghanistan and whether they should be there or anything like that. It's not going for a political perspective, at least in my opinion. If it had been going for that, we would have seen more evidence of that. It's about this guy and his search for forgiveness and what it means to forgive an accident. And I find this kind of stuff really moving. There's one moment in particular that is really hard-hitting to me, and it's actually a little bit before the climax. For me, they go in a little bit hard on that moment of decision. They play it up to be a bit over-dramatic, and it feels a little bit out of step with the understated nature of the rest of the film. But as a whole, I do think this film comes off. It is a success. It's a bit of a shame about the things that I am sure are not the way they intended them to be, but that's kind of just filmmaking. So in the end, I would suggest that you watch this one. Suggest is my 7th ranking out of 10, so it's definitely in the positives. Jirga is probably not as good as some other films that I would also give a suggest, but that's why I attach words to them. It's not just a score. It's not just 7 out of 10. It's me saying whether I think this film has something to offer that other films do not, and I think in this case definitely yes. So don't expect to be blown away by this film, because if you go in with that mentality, then you'll probably be disappointed. It's not going to blow you away, but if you just sit back and let this experience, that is quite a different one from a lot of movies, wash over you, then I think you'll enjoy it. So guys, now is the time that I address the thing that everyone's been talking about non-stop for about the last month, which is of course coronavirus and the lockdown that Australia is in a different stage of to the rest of the world and whatever, but I am basically in my house I have been for the last 2 weeks, and that's fine for me. I'm not like depressed by that or anything, because I would probably just about do that anyway, and now I've just got an excuse to do it. But unfortunately, I have been stood down from my job, which was kind of inevitable. It was always going to happen because the places that I photograph for a living, they've all closed. So that's not helping. If you're looking for a way to help this channel out, you can of course like and subscribe and comment. That does help me out. Head over to my other channel, Days of French and Swedish, which is all about language learning. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not learning a language, well, you should be, okay? You're stuck inside for a long time. Why not come out at the other end of that speaking fluent Pashto or Italian or whatever? Okay, I can't promise you that, but I can promise you that I give you genuine, real language learning advice for the real world. Yeah, those are the ways you can help out at the moment. And I hope you guys are well wherever you are. I hope this house arrest thing isn't getting you too down, and I hope you're not sick and your loved ones are not sick. So thanks for watching this review and giving me your time, and I'll see you soon. See you guys.